some interesting storylines in the opening weekends of the URC season, but things really kick up another notch this Saturday night. Leinster host Munster at the Aviva Stadium, and there are set to be a host of international stars on show, some of whom who will be taking part in their first game of the new season. And it's set to be an absolute cracker. Welcome to the latest Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here, and I'm delighted to be joined by Rúaidhrí O'Connor and Luke Fitzgerald. And Rud, I don't think we've had a chance to talk to you since we kind of turned our attention away from the World Cup and towards the kind of club season and all the games to come. And we might start with Leinster and get a kind of your opinion on where you think they're at heading into the new campaign. We haven't talked a huge amount of them in the first couple of weeks, a bit about Neen Aber a few weeks back, but I suppose their fixtures haven't been the most kind of eye-catching of the provinces thus far, but it really does change on Saturday night. You know, Johnny Sexton's gone, Stuart Lancaster's gone, Neen Aber's coming in, but he hasn't probably had much hands-on time with the players just yet.
He's not here yet.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's coming in at some stage this week, is he?
I think tomorrow. Yeah, Friday, I think. But yeah, it's a big factor.
Yeah, it's funny when we talked about him a few weeks ago, like, I said he'll probably need a few weeks off, and Luke was like, no, he'd come straight in. And I was like, oh, no, I say he'll probably be off for a couple of weeks celebrating that World Cup win. And I actually thought he might be in a bit sooner, but that's neither here nor there. Sorry, my long-winded question is basically like, has Leinster's window closed a little bit for you, Rudd, in terms of them being where they were the last couple of years, where they did seem to be, very much operating at the top of European rugby? Now, they didn't win a European Cup in that time, but the team they're putting out is pretty much the same, minus Johnny Sexton, albeit he didn't play a huge amount last season. Stuart Lancaster, their key coach, is gone. They've replaced him with a good coach, but he hasn't got his feet under the desk even yet. Are they going to be any better this year than they were last year? And then by extension, if they're not, are they worse?
I certainly don't think they're worse, Will. I think it's a really interesting question, and the honest answer is none of us will know. And like, the thing with Leinster is they're so hard to analyse because it's a month in May, it's May or June this year because the World Cup, everything's a bit later. So it's June when we'll actually get to know whether they're any better or worse. Especially the way the European pools are now. I know they have to go to La Rochelle, but really the way they've started the season is maybe the way that you're like, maybe not being unbelievably consistently brilliant across 10 months and then falling off in the last month and not falling off by much is the way to go. But like, they've lost Johnny Sexton, but he didn't play it all last season. They've lost Lancaster a bit, but they've replaced him with a superb coach by all accounts. Like, everyone I've asked about it, all on and off the record, the stuff you hear about this guy is the endorsements are ringing. It's everyone just raves about what he'll bring. So that's really interesting. Obviously, he's a small window to actually make changes for this season, but they need to learn to win tight games at the end of the season. And beating Munster at the weekend or beating La Rochelle away, they might feel good for them. It might give them a bit of a sugar rush, but it's not going to actually sate what they need. And even Hugo Keenan, when I asked him about maybe going to the sevens this season, he was like, no, my goal this year is to win a European Cup or an Investec Champions Cup as it is now. And the Champions Cup is their holy grail. They want that fifth star they were obsessed with last season, and they were obsessed with last year. We won't know until then, are they able to do it? And that's a real frustration about analysing Leinster across the season. But when you see, yes, they weren't brilliant for 80 minutes across the Scarlets, and when they dipped, they didn't look fantastic at all. But for the first 15 minutes and probably the last 25, especially when Ross Byrne came on, like, they're a good team. Like, they're a seriously good team. They're still, if not the best team in Europe across a season, they're top 2 or 3, and they will still be there or thereabouts in both competitions come that point. The problem they have is for 2 seasons they come up short in the semi-final of the URC and the final of Europe, and judging them until then is very difficult. But I don't think they've gone backwards in any way, really, because they still have the bulk of the Ireland squad. They still have some of the best players in the world in their position. Like, Dan Sheehan is operating on an incredible level. Caelan Doris, Ringrose, James Ryan, and him being captain. It's their team now, and I don't see them dropping off in any way really this season. When we'll know if they're better or not is when we get to that business end.
Yeah, it's funny just when you mentioned the stars on the jersey there. This is like, God, I don't want to hear that bloody cliche again.
Is that banned alongside World Cup cycle, is it?
Oh, well, it's banned definitely on this podcast. It doesn't need to be banned among the squad. Like, God, if I hear another person saying that, I really thought that was when they started coming unravel towards the end of last season. I don't want to single out Andrew Porter, but I will. Like, that interview he gave in the build-up to the URC semi-final, I thought was way off kind of key in terms of the messaging he should have been putting out there, and ultimately they didn't add any stars to the jersey. Luke, what's your perspective on Leinster? Like, are they standing still? Are they going backwards? Are they going forwards? As Rudd said, they have the best collection of players probably in the tournament. That it's still like it's like a full collection of internationals. Obviously, La Rochelle's unbelievable as well. So like their player group is still super strong, but it's just in terms of like they are running back at like basically the same team minus some very key intellectual property, if not on pitch stuff in Johnny Sexton from last season. So where do you think they are?
Yeah, look, I think theoretically there probably should be ahead. I think the timing of Nina Bar coming in is probably, it doesn't seem like it's ideal, but it actually might be because I think he gets enough of a look at the internationals, and I think most of those guys should be able to adapt to this. I'm hoping small changes he makes, and he should be able to have an impact on the wider squad during Six Nations. That's when you think he'll probably go, okay, well, now I can really kind of. If there's something radical I want to change, I don't think there's something radical, by the way, but if there's something radical I want to change, that'll be the time to do it. And I think everyone else should bed back in, and hopefully you might see it come to fruition at, again, that key time of the season. So theoretically they should be ahead. And I think that's, I'm basing that on, Johnny Sexton's playing time last year. They all talked about the IP, and there was certainly that there, but I'm still pretty sure that Lancaster was driving most of that, as was Leo Cullen, um, you know, and the rest of the coaching staff there. I find it interesting with Leinster. So everyone will talk about the defence, and that is certainly something that I think they need to improve. Like, there's still way too many missed tackles. I still think they're a bit sloppy. But I just think generally, you know, they obviously have a game plan, I think, to wear teams down. That makes sense to me with the squad they have and the quality they have. But I don't think you can always do that. You heard me talk last year or the last couple of years a lot about Leinster not being able to play slow ever. Not like it always feels like it's frantic, trying to break you down constantly, and that works well when there's a team that can't cope with you. But the bigger teams can cope well. So that's kind of something that I'm interested to see is, can they actually play some negative rugby at times? Because when they tried to do that against La Rochelle when they needed to, when they got no go forward, when they were burning guys in rucks at the end of the game, and there was no one for Ross Byrne to pass to, they couldn't play the slow game then. Whereas South Africa are brilliant at that. South Africa are really, really good at judging when to play, when not to play. And generally it's not to play. But do you know what I mean? That's something that I'm going to be watching quite closely with Leinster in the big games is, are they able to change the tempo? Do they have a feel for the game at the crucial junctures to be able to move slightly away from playing the kind of high risk rugby that they play, and they're really good at that. And I'm not sure what the difficult thing for me in this is wondering, am I right in that? Like, is it right for them to be able to switch to the slower game plan? My sense is from the results that it is, but I part of me thinks, like, is that what you should be trying to do against the bigger teams too? Should you still be trying to play fast? Well, I'm a bit torn on that one. My sense is from the results that they need to make a change in it. And I think I'm interested to see if that's what Nina Bar thinks as well. So, I mean, if you looked at the weekend against the Scarlets, just a few things stuck out to me that burned them in the final. Lots of missed tackles from different guys. I know the thing about Ringrose, they're sending him up as a shooter, but he's missing so many tackles. Like, he's trying to absolutely end people all the time, and there's a few of them that are trying to do that. But I just think that if you could just pull it in just slightly, make the tackle. Just, you don't have to bury guys all the time. And I see that with a lot of the Leinster players, like trying to play the miracle offload sometimes. Sometimes, like, just play the extra phase. I don't think that takes you too far away from the game plan. So I still think they look a little frantic to me, Will. I think it works well against the Scarlets and against other teams of that ilk, because you can just break them down at the end and everyone looks like a hero. They just can't cope with all the quality. But I wonder, have they thought about that? Have they thought about why they're coming unstuck? Because I think that's probably a reason.
Yeah, Rod, do you have any perspective on that piece of
Well,
it?
a couple, yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I thought the way they managed the game against the Scarlets was pretty poor actually, and it had echoes of the Aviva in May, because they went 19-0 up in the first 15 minutes, blew them away, and lost their way in the game, and the Scarlets kind of, having had a yellow card in the opening minute, which was just a crazy piece of discipline from Johnny Williams. They realised that if they dirtied up the breakdown, and Holly Davidson wasn't refereeing it particularly well, they they could basically disrupt Leinster, and Leinster got thrown off the rhythm, and they started giving away penalty after penalty after penalty. And while the Scarlets aren't good enough to make that pay across 80 minutes and lost 54-5, better teams will, if they do their homework, and I'm sure George Murray down in Munster has done his homework this week, will look at that and go, hang on a second, we're good enough that if we get that amount of ball against Leinster, we'll score. will cause them problems. And I think the mental challenge for Leinster is that if a team does get on top of them in the second, third quarter, in a similar game, then the scars of La Rochelle and Munster coming at them at the death last season will come back to haunt them as well. So they need to learn how to manage games better. And I appreciate that the Sam Prendergast is very inexperienced and didn't, and started last weekend. And I would imagine Ross Byrne, with his vast experience now, is probably a better controlling 10 at this stage of his career. Sorry, is a better controlling 10 at this stage of his career, and possibly would manage that game better. Would maybe just instructed, like, the forwards never took around the corner. They had the Scarlets physically, and yet they never made the most of it. Sometimes you got to play to your strengths. You don't have to go wide all the time. You're 19 up, beat them up. You've got the Ireland forward pack. Kick it to the corner and go to your maul. You don't have to score Hollywood tries all the time. There is a time for just beating the crap out of the other team so you can tire them out at the other end. So, like, Leinster made an enormous number of tackles last weekend against a Scarlets team who were very game but limited because they'd rested some of their internationals and are just, all the Welsh teams are way behind at the moment. But as I said, I think the teams that are doing their homework will watch that game and learn an awful lot about how to take Leinster on. And on Luke's point about Garry Ringrose, like, he's the the co-captain now. He's a senior Irish international. He's a world class player, but he's right. He makes too many missed tackles, and there is this theory that's been floated across time about good missed tackles, and there is such a thing. But I don't think I would love to go through it and see how many are the majority of those missed tackles good, in inverted commas, or will Jacques Nienaber go to him and go, hang on, like, you're a world class centre. Why is your missed tackle count this high? What is it about your decision making? And he can point out the ones where he channeled the guy inside. Fair enough, and that does.
Head
But
down off the feet, Rods. Head
yeah,
down off the feet all the time. Like, that's not like. I actually get the point about. Do you know what I think is being misconstrued on it, Rods? Sorry, it's just such an interesting.
no,
point
you're right.
Garry is one of my favorite players. I just love him, and he's a great guy. Like, he's one of those fellas. Like, I'm not surprised he's come in as captain there, and he's a really tough fella. Like, it's not that. It's he's just going a bit kamikaze into things. There's plenty of time in sports across the board where there's a cruising level of top quality, and I think good missed tackles are ones where you actually stay on your feet and you push people back in. But if you go off your feet and you're missing, that is not a good tackle. If you're on the ground and someone else is up, there's a simple sum there, and that just doesn't work for me. And I know what they're saying, but the key part, what they're trying to do is push people in. You should be able to do that on your feet.
Like, is there a strategic element to it though, Luke? Because he's playing in number 13 under one of the best coaches in the world at international level, and under a coaching ticket with Lancaster, who have been heralded for years and years, some of the best coaches, and he is an incredibly diligent, thoughtful, and intelligent fella who listens to his coaches. So I can't imagine that he's doing this thing on his off his own bat and not being pulled up in reviews on a Monday. Like, like, that strikes me as, like, it must be part of a strategy for him to do that.
I think you're right, Woods.
Which doesn't make it. Yeah, I'm the same, and I think it's an issue. And I mean, someone sent me a clip of the Scotland game of the World Cup where he missed 7, and none of them were good missed tackles. They were all crazy. Like, they were, and some of them were just really basic errors. And I think for a player at the level that Ringrose is, and a guy who could be in the conversation for the Ireland captaincy, I think Nienaber's going to, like, well, look, it'd be interesting to talk to him about it. But I think Nienaber will pull him aside and go, I want to change what you do here because it's not working for you or your team. I mean, it is sometimes. I mean, he's not a bad defender, but he just misses too many tackles.
He's got a technique thing too as well. He's head down, like, he's head down and upper body away from the feet. Unless you're like your feet should be when you're trying to tackle someone, it drives me mad when I see people, especially coaches coaching smaller players, to tackle upper body away from feet. Like, it's body weight on body weight then, and the other guy has got his feet underneath them. It drives. It's such bad technique. It's got to be head up, and it's got to be plant foot as close to the body as possible and drive through there. You're better off staying on your feet through a tackle. Honestly, people talking about chop tackles drive me mad. Just a proper technique for all sizes is to get the feet as close as possible to the person. And I just feel like they've gone a little bit away from the really pure technique of it, because he is a great tackler. He always was a great tackler. And I've just noticed this the last while. I think sometimes you give someone kind of a little bit of free rein, and you saw how good he was in the rest of the game. I mean, some of his ball handling, his carrying, like, he was so good throughout the game. He's so fit and he's so tough as well. Breakdowns, everything. He's a complete player. And to my mind, that's a part of the game where he's actually been hurting himself a lot as well because he's so kamikaze. There's a thing here for him personally as well, like lots of head knocks and things like that. control the body more, you still get great results. The key thing is that the collision happens behind the gain line. Not that you absolutely end the guy. It's great if you do, but do it in a controlled fashion. So, because if you saw, like one of the Scarlets tries, he had a bad miss in the lead up to it as well, and kind of it didn't end up kind of costing, but he ended up being laid into position. And then I think the Scarlets, I think it was Joe McCarthy got lost on the outside close to the line, but that should have been Gary's position because he ended up having to fall back from the missed tackle inside Joe McCarthy. So it happened a good few times in the game, and I'm kind of watching it closely because I think he's kind of a crucial guy for Ireland. I think he's probably our only real 13. Hume, hopefully we think is coming, but obviously that hasn't really happened as of yet. But Gary's crucial to the Irish team as well, so I'm watching him very closely. So interested to hear you. Sounds like you're on the same path as me with it, and I wonder, it will be interesting to see if Nienaber has similar thoughts on that, because I think he does need to tidy it up.
Yeah, obviously the defence will be Nienaber's main remit, but Rud, you touched on it, I think, in one of your first answers about maybe the mental side, what he can bring after those narrow knockout victories. And, where do you think Leinster are at mentally? If you look at this collection of players since they've last won a Champions Cup, now they haven't all been involved, but 5 seasons of coming up short, including the last 2 where they've been pretty sizable collapses in the final quarter and the second half of finals. 2 World Cups have happened in the meantime, both of which Ireland, with a lot of Leinster players, went into as world number 1. The first one in Japan, we all know, was a disaster. This time around, not quite to that level, obviously, but still came up short. We've obviously had our disagreements on that as well. But that's a lot of mental scars, a lot of coming up short in big games when these guys have been favourites. I think you joked to me, now it was a joke, but you said they're kind of becoming the Mayo footballers of the rugby world, which is probably, obviously, they've won a few trophies themselves.
I'm not sure that was me. I'm not sure that was
fair
me.
enough, sorry. Maybe it was
You're
me. I don't know.
yourself from that quote. Is it a
Yeah,
quote or is it a...
well, look,
I think
they're open.
sounds like you were off the record on that one, Will.
I'm not sure. I mean, I flip flop. Anyone who reads my stuff, I can flip flop, but I don't. Look, they're open to that stuff. That's what happens when you don't get the job done. Like, you go back to the, what was it, 07, 08, and the Ladyboys thing. It's when you're not getting over the line, you leave yourself open to that sort of criticism, fair or unfair. And then look, I was like, even the URCs they won, they haven't won it since it went to the full bore URC that we have now with real, Munster went down to South Africa and won. Like, that's why people look at that as a real achievement. It's not to diminish the achievement of beating Munster in an empty stadium in 2021, but it wasn't quite the same, So, I do think they're too good not to win trophies, and they need to land at least one of them this season. And speaking to them themselves, really the only way they will measure this as a success is if they win the double, which is a really high bar to try and keep to. But when you have the caliber of players that they have, that's what you should be delivering. Like, you certainly should be putting yourself in a position to do it. And when you get into that position, then you're not going to be satisfied with a 1 point loss in the final. Mentally, like, all those defeats have to have had an impact, particularly like the La Rochelle one. There's so much water in the bridge that you can forget how impactful that was at the time. But I don't remember, certainly outside of a World Cup, a game that just felt so seismic. And so I remember the next day, just people were ringing me to just talk about it. Like, it was one kind of game that everyone wanted to just get stuck into. Like, people don't ring me about Leinster Scarlets. People don't ring me full stop most of the time. It's usually on WhatsApp. But like, it's just like, it was a weird day. You were getting messages from everywhere going, Jesus, what happened? It was such a, between the schmozzling, the dressing room, and Sexton going after the ref and all that sort of stuff. But the match itself was so seismic, and that was damaging. And we wondered whether that would have an impact in Ireland at the World Cup. But I don't necessarily think that it did. But this is all a build up in these players' minds. You got to look at Caelan Doris and Hugo Keenan, have never won a European Cup. Players of that era weren't there in 18, so they haven't got that star that they want to put in their jersey. Sorry, Will. But they feel like they haven't contributed to that Leinster legacy. They are Leinster players, but until you join the club that Luke is in, you're not really part of it. There's kind of you got to earn your stripes in that club, and they haven't done it. And if you go into the UCD, and I wonder if this is the right thing to do, and I know Munster changed the imagery that was on their walls over time because it started to become a burden. There are trophies everywhere. There are pictures of the great teams everywhere. Now, the URC teams are there as well, but I'm sure those players walk in every day, look up at that wall, and want to be up there. It's a small thing. So, look, they're good. They're too good to not be in contention, but getting over the line has been their problem. And that mental challenge, like Declan Darcy's in there, the former Dublin footballer, that's partly his role. Gary Keegan was doing that role with, sorry, is doing that role with Ireland, and I'm sure that if they want to go to him, they can. He's like it's a bigger picture thing, and he will give them the time. But they've got to find the solutions themselves as well. They've got the tools to do it, and like they're so close. They're not far away at all. It's there was luck involved in all of those defeats. And if Jimmy O'Brien doesn't get a penalty given against him that wasn't a penalty for that high ball challenge, they might have just got over the line against La Rochelle, and we'd be talking about title defenses and the best team in Europe. These are the so-called fine margins. But as long as you're not getting those fine margins, as long as you're ending up on off the podium on big days, you're going to have these questions, and these questions will remain. And if they lose it again this year, then the Mayo thing becomes bigger. That kind of stuff. The nearly men of the English football, all that sort of stuff. Like the parallels can be there. It's a team as good as Leinster shouldn't have won European Cup in 11 years. There was obviously a dip in the Matt O'Connor post Joe Schmidt era, but really they've been consistently competing for most of that time, getting to semi-finals and finals. And I think there should be, I presume there's an interrogation within the four walls in UCD as to what's the difference, what's the gap, what are they missing. And some of that's playing, whether their front row bench is good enough, whether Al Alatoa has been a good enough signing, whether their tight five, is strong enough across 80 minutes. That's a question. Jenkins and Alatoa, could they be spending that money, on one really forceful tight head prop who get them over the line? But you look at what the academy is producing, the fact that Jamie Osborne is looking like a fully formed player this year, that Prendergast I think won't be a major force in Europe this year, but in the years to come they've a quality 10 coming through. Fintan Gunn at the weekend looked absolutely quality as a 9. Like obviously these are not for this season, but they will be. James Culham, these players will be contributing over the next 5-6 years. Leinster are going nowhere. They just got to figure out a way to get over the line.
Just two things from what you said there. Like you mentioned Caelan Doris, and I feel like I've read so many interviews of his after defeats in the last few years about him doing massive soul searching and having like a real terrible period of time. I feel like the guy's wheeled out after every big defeat, and he basically has the same answer. So for him, and he's a guy who said himself he hasn't played well in any of those finals, or he didn't play very well in the quarterfinal either. So there's been some guys who haven't hit their straps in the big game. The other one you mentioned, Al Alatoa, I was actually saying this to a friend the other day. He really skated on that red card in the last play of that game. Like, Leinster were literally on the line, about to score the winning try. He has this outrageous clear out, gets sent off, and then it's like, Ross Byrne didn't get in the pocket, like, what a bottler. It's like, Leinster were about to win the game if Al Alatoa hadn't, done that disgraceful clear out. And it's like, people have said, we'll just never mention it again.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it's one of those things. A final, like, you do analyze it and stuff, but then it kind of, the season moves on. Everyone goes on holidays and it's World Cup warm up time, and you don't really dwell on it sometimes. I just don't know. It's a question hanging over Ollie Yeager as he comes over from the Crusaders, is whether Super Rugby certainly in its current guise, prepares you to be a tight head prop in European rugby, because it's a different challenge. And should Leinster be shopping at a higher shelf when it comes to that stuff? Should they be going and getting international tight heads or South Africans, or even there's a guy, Paul Alloa-Meal is in ahead of Alatoa for Samoa, and he's just a destructive tight head scrummager who plays for Stade Francais. He's not a big name, but that's kind of what Leinster need, is a destructive tight head scrummager who can come on and lessen Furlong's burden. So look, it looks like he's in his final year at Leinster. So whether that's his decision or their decision, it looks like he'll be moving on at the end of the season. Claremont are sniffing around, certainly. So it is a question hanging over him, and whether he was a great signing. Like, he's a good player, a decent player, good pedigree, but he hasn't been at the business end. That moment was a bad moment for him, and part of the reason they lost the game. And Doris, look, I think Doris gets special attention because everyone in the world knows he's one of the best number 8s in the world, and I think the All Blacks hammered the hammer that day. I think it was up to others to step up in his shadow, because they were double, triple teaming him. Every time he got the ball, he was getting absolutely milled. So maybe Ireland should have devised a strategy to get the ball away from him and use the space, because like 3 All Blacks were giving him attention, so there's space elsewhere. But that he'll feel it, and he does feel it. And like, he's an interesting fella who is, both his parents are psychotherapists, and he engages it. He's spoken openly about how he works with a therapist himself, and he's very thoughtful and interested in the mind, and he's quite open in interviews as well. So he's probably more, I got the sense, Hugo Heenan did post match on Saturday, and we asked him about the World Cup, and he was very much, and Hugo's very polished in the media, very much kind of like, oh yeah, look, we're really hurt, but I'm moving on now, I'm looking forward. And like, that was his message that he was getting out. Whereas I think Caelan would probably engage the question a little bit more, because that's the way he goes about things. So I wouldn't worry about him bouncing back. He's too good not to. And even against the Scarlets, like, these games, he's such a class class player. Like he's important. But
Bit
I think
sloppy
when
though.
what?
Bit sloppy. A lot of penalties. A lot of penalties. I
Yeah,
thought. A lot of drop balls. A lot of sloppy offloads and stuff. Like for a guy, I think he's too good to be. Yeah. Look, first game back. There was probably lots of reasons why. I'm probably being a bit harsh, but I kind of agree. I thought at kind of crucial junctures, he gets a bit frantic sometimes, like he's one of those guys who it kind of ties into that Leinster mindset where, he's got to get the turnover every single time. He's got to, like, he can't just win. Like, I feel a lot of times at Leinster, it has to be like 100% win. It can't be a 51% win. Do you know that kind of way? Like, they're all like, so sometimes I just think that they don't really realize that it's a kind of it can be an accumulation of small wins, like really tiny wins, that actually, make you a really great and consistent player to get the wins. Um, and I wonder that sometimes about them. I think an accumulation of the 1%ers or the 0.5% wins in each kind of contact creates the big one. But I feel like they're going for the big one a lot. I feel like he's one of those players a bit. But God, he is great to watch. I will say that it is interesting to hear them talking about it, though, isn't it? I mean, and it does feel like it's becoming a little bit of a burden. It does feel like they need to have a bit of a reset, and they're thinking about all these things in Leinster. But yeah, I mean, the signings thing, just to tie in on that, I mean, it is interesting where they go, isn't it? I would say the Alala Toa thing, that one was never sure about that one, and I don't think that did work. I don't think that's really worked out. Can anyone really say that that's really worked out? Like, I think there was times where you'd be saying, God, I really want to have someone I can bring on 30 minutes into a big game, so I can really empty Furlong. And I just feel like that's probably not there. I don't know if you guys feel the same about that. And I think that's probably somewhere where you could definitely add something in. Whereas I do think they kind of the second row, they do have options now. You've got McCarthy, you've got Baird if you need to. You've got Jenkins, and I just think there's plenty beside Ryan there that you can be very destructive there and deal with, a really top class second row. You might not, you're never going to have the size of Skelton, but you can still deal with them with great players, And in fairness, Ryan going off was probably the turning point in the game there, just as a side thought in back to the final. But it is interesting to see what shape Leinster take in the market, and I do think they probably need to be. That requires some thought, and I would agree. I think maybe if you think about Jenkins and you think about Alalatoa, one might be what Leinster need, like one absolute starlet of a player. Is maybe or someone who gives them the other side of the coin, not the fast play. The really kind of polished guy who can play a quick game. Maybe you do have someone who's really destructive at the scrum. So interesting to see where they go with
like
that one. I hadn't thought about that, Rhodes. Yeah,
there was
it's going to be
there was a
there's
really
work to do
interesting
there.
there was a really interesting interview with a guy called Phil Keith Roach in the London Times yesterday. Owen Slaughter was on the show before, spoke to him, and he was the scrum coach for England in 2003, and he was talking about England scrums, and he was talking about how in the modern era, the likes of Ellis Genge and Kyle Sinclair, they don't live for the scrum. They're ball players. They're former. I think you said Genge was an 8 and Sinclair was a centre, and but they were so big that they got put into the front row, and they can do the all court game that Leinster play. But when it comes down to it, at the elite level, when you're playing against a La Rochelle or a South Africa, you need the monster element of it. And I think Porter and Furlong do marry that quite well. But to go to the market and try and get someone who can do that, you're talking about signing like current Springboks, current All Blacks, and bringing them into your and Ulster have gone and done it. They've gone and got Stephen Kitsov, who starts for the Springboks, and like he doesn't. Kitsov is rounded. He's very good at the breakdown. He's not a bad ball player, but really he's a scrummaging loosehead. And he doesn't do the box office stuff that Porter does across the pitch. And if Leinster are trying to play their game model, can they sign a kits off and basically say, right, you're just scrummaging and the other 14 play? Or if they went and got Malherbe from the Stormers, because everyone in South Africa is on the table, but Malherbe is 145 kilos and will just scrummage. He doesn't do anything else. And he would come on and lock down your scrum in the European Cup final, and you would have no worries. But he wouldn't be able to go into your shape and pull those passes. So it's a balance that Leinster have to strike. But what we're seeing at the elite level of World Cups, and this goes for all the provinces, but elite level of World Cups, maybe less so URC, but European Cup when you're coming against a La Rochelle and to a lesser extent a Toulouse and some of the big French teams, you need those monster scrummagers, and you need 4 of them. You can't, or well, 6 of them really. The scrum needs to be at the heart of everything you do. And if you're signing Alalato from the Crusaders, where he's a ball player, and he is good at the ball playing stuff, like it's not, I wouldn't criticize him completely, but I think when it comes to the scrummaging, he just at the elite level isn't there, and I think that's something that's let them down a little bit because they can. you can flog Furlong and Porter all you like, but across the season you can't be leaving those guys out there for 75, 80 minutes. We saw with Jack McGrath that basically, Ireland and Leinster relied on him for 75, 80 minutes for so long that his body broke and he had to retire really early. So that's the risk. Furlong's picked up a lot of injuries, partly because we relied on him so much. So you need to build that depth, and that depth needs to be elite scrummaging, and that's really rare.
Yeah, Furlong definitely looks like he's feeling the effects, as you say, of kind of playing so many minutes over so many years. To move on to Munster Road, I want to get your opinion on the Peter O'Mahony news, stepping down as Munster captain.
Yeah,
kind of interesting. Came out of the blue. He was obviously the captain last weekend. What are you thinking there? Is he being lined up for the Ireland captaincy, and he's basically kind of maybe leaving one aside to devote his attention to the other one?
Well, without any insight, so I'm guessing and I'm drawing conclusions from the moves. I would think that's what's going to happen. Yeah, I think if you're not talking about cycles and if you're just looking at the next Six Nations and you're also kind of going, right, Peter O'Mahony said after the game he's thinking about retiring, and you're looking for some continuity, I think Andy Farrell will. And look, Andy Farrell values Peter O'Mahony. He's recently played very well in the World Cup, albeit not very well against the All Blacks in that quarter final. Let's say it was one of his poorer games for Ireland, but he's still, when Sexton leaves, and we know that Sexton's going to leave a void. Peter is the next is Sexton's chief lieutenant and the next alpha in the room. It's I think with Sexton and Earls leaving, O'Mahony is the next senior man up, and I don't think Andy Farrell is looking at what age he'll be in 4 years' time. I think he's looking at what age he'll be at the Six Nations, and we'll probably sell it to him as, I want you, in a kind of almost Dylan Hartley way, because Dylan Hartley didn't make the World Cup, but I want you to lead the first 2 years of this cycle. See how you are. We'll give you that summer off if you don't make the lines, and then we'll see how you are. And if you're good enough, we'll pick you, and if you're not, you won't. And I think Farrell has enough leaders in there that if O'Mahony needs a rest, or if he's not going to be like Sexton where he needs to play every game. Like if Ryan Baird or Brian Gleeson or Dave McCann or whoever comes through and is just shooting the lights out, I think he'll go, look, you can captain us off the bench. We're going to go with James Ryan or whoever. But I think to set the tone around the camp and be the senior guy, O'Mahony bridges the gap there. And that would be my sense of where they're going to go with it. It's a natural evolution from O'Driscoll, O'Connell, Best, Sexton. It's almost from the same boot room, like Liverpool. Like it's almost coming from the same thing, and then they can use it to skill up the next guy, because I don't think the next guy is as obvious. So that would be my sense of it. Or else O'Mahony's just decided he couldn't be bothered with the hassle, doesn't want to do interviews anymore. But he's actually better at that stuff than he used to be, and he's done it for a long time. And he probably sees the need to future-proof Munster a little bit and to give someone else that role, so that when he does step away from Munster, and if he's Ireland captain, he probably won't play very much for Munster for the next little while, that they have kind of a contingency plan to get off. He's got the trophy. He lifted the trophy. He's done it for 10, 11 years, which is longer than anyone really ever could be asked to do it. Like he's done his time. It's I think he steps away having served his province very, very well. But my sense is that he'll be the next Ireland captain.
I just thought maybe the garden was becoming too much to manage, and he wanted to devote more time to it away from the pitch. Luke, do you think with Peter O'Mahony, is that your sense? Do you think Peter O'Mahony would he be your choice for the Ireland captaincy? A short term kind of potentially move just to kind of bridge to the next generation.
Yeah, he's the obvious candidate, I think, because it looks to me like they dropped James Ryan for the quarterfinal, I think, or else, I know he wasn't really fit or whatever. But
like the Scotland game, yeah, he was injured for the quarterfinal. Yeah,
but it looked like he. Well, yeah, well, I think if he would they have pushed him. It sounds like they might have pushed him if he was. Look, I think if he was playing unbelievably well, he might have been on the pitch against New Zealand for the first. They might have tried him. I think. Look, anyway, I think he was dropped at the World Cup, which kind of complicates things. He's to my mind, the kind of natural in there. Or Henderson. Henderson is the other guy. But I just don't feel like Henderson has the same kind of sway with the outside of Ulster as he does like in the Irish camp, by virtue of just probably not starting as much. Now, you could probably make the same argument for O'Mahony as well, but I think Peter seems to be held in higher regard and seems to be more of a leader in there, a better voice. And yeah, I think it probably does make sense. I think it's really obvious, but I don't want to have egg in my face. I think if you're like, why would you step down from the Munster job at this point? It's not that heavy a burden. I don't think he's still going to be in all the same meetings. Like they'll have a leadership team who are in the meetings, and I guarantee you he's going to be in there.
But Brian did the same thing when you were at Leinster. He just kind of said, what, and I'm sure he was still a senior figure in all the meetings. He like it's 11 years. Yeah, but like 11 years is a long time, and I do think there's a future proofing element of going. I need to give this to someone else so that when I step away,
Leo's the same age as Leo's pretty much the same age as Trico.
yeah,
I never
true.
thought I thought that was an Irish thing, and I actually think Leo. I think actually that might have been a bit of a joint jobby, possibly.
Yeah,
That
but I
mightn't
think
have been
whoever
an
comes
all
in,
I'm
whether it's
stepping
Ty
away. I think that
Byrne,
might have
who,
been.
but if it's Ty
I
Byrne,
don't know if that was actually.
but I
Sorry,
don't
go
know.
on.
I think whoever comes in O'Mahony will still be will be essential to every decision Munster make, and will still be a cultural
Exactly.
leader in
So I
there.
don't
So
see the only thing that makes sense to me is that he's got the bigger job, the Irish captaincy,
yeah,
which I think does make sense to not have the two because
either that or he's
I
retiring at the end of the season. They're the two scenarios really.
oh really yeah
Well,
that's
that's
fair
the
enough as
two.
well
Like
yeah.
he's got 1 year left in his contract, and maybe he's going. You know what? I want to just enjoy my last year. But it's one of those two things, and I would suggest it's the Ireland captaincy is the more likely of those two.
That's what I think as well. Yeah, he seems
Yeah,
to be in good shape to me. I know his shoulders and all seem to be completely battered, but like, he's playing some of the best rugby I think I've ever seen him play. I think he's playing great, and he still has that spring for the line out. That's his point of difference. I think he's so dangerous and disruptive at the front of the line out, the defensive line out. That is, sorry. Um, so that still worked well for Ireland. Of all the things in the line out, during the World Cup, the defensive line out actually did work quite well, and Peter was very destructive there. So
mm.
and he still looks like he's got a yard of pace. He looks like he's added some strings to his game in terms of his ball handling as well. I think he's playing great rugby. So, yeah, interested to see what unfolds there. I would have thought the Ireland captaincy thing probably makes the most sense, but yeah, the retirement one as well. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, feels to me like well maybe he's one of those guys that could just go out on top, But I think he's playing brilliant rugby and Munster just being successful. I don't see why you wouldn't go out as Munster captain in your last season. I don't see how that would be that disruptive. So, but you could be. I can see the merit in what you're saying. Yeah. So interested to watch that space. Well, I mean, no one else is an obvious candidate for me. Because who probably Henshaw's there a long time, but he just kind of injury prone and hasn't played as much. And Bundy, he looks to have probably ousted him. He was so good at the World Cup. Garry Ringrose, but he's taken on the mantle at Leinster a little bit as well. But he's injury prone too. So it's a tricky kind of void that they'll have to fill outside of Sexton. So we watch that space, and I think it is kind of it does seem to be a more important job than I always placed. And it never really bothered me who was giving the speech before the game, that kind of way. But some people seem to love it. So we wait and see. I think it might be quite an important thing actually.
Yeah, well, the relationship with the referee is an important one as well. Like, you want someone who can influence the ref. I think that's like the most important thing that I can see is in some captains are far better than others in terms of getting calls or even just their back and forth with the ref. Obviously, Johnny Sexton infamously took him a long time, I think, to get the grips with that part of the role. But
He was very good at the World Cup, Will. I
yeah,
thought.
no,
Do you
I
think?
think he settled into it. I think when he was when he was more the elder statesman rather than just kind of the star player, I think he maybe got a little better relationships out of the ref. But obviously, Jakob Piper might say differently considering that.
He wouldn't even let him apologize to him. Apparently, yeah,
Yeah.
shocking. Yeah, wouldn't even take a call. Like weird. Anyway,
Rud, anything else Munster related just ahead of the weekend that's caught your eye over the first few weeks, or that you find intriguing heading into the new season generally?
Well, yeah, like there's loads. I think there's the lingering question over the two Springbok second rows. John Klein now non-Irish qualified. I think potentially a contender for the Munster captaincy long term. He's a very consistent player, really well regarded. Just won their Player of the Year award, and he's a World Cup winner. So, um, I think I think they'll probably retain him and say good luck to Snyman. And from what I hear, both of their contracts have been offered around the world, and that's normal. I'm sure Luke's contract appeared in all sorts of places during his time, but I think that the Klein would prefer to stay. He basically considers Limerick his home, and I think that they will. He's so consistent and he's more available than Snyman. Snyman's only played 10 games in nearly 4 years, so but that
He
kind
played
of
more
frees
for
up.
the Springboks than he has for Munster, which is mad.
Pretty
Probably.
much. I mean, and there's a lot of luck involved in that. I'm not, there's no, the guy did
poor
his
guy.
cruciate twice.
Yeah,
Like, it's not
And
diminishing,
he was
but
so good at the World Cup when he came off the bench like
yeah,
that. It just
he is probably the
yeah.
best lock in the world, and he's certainly up there. Anyway, he's a
is he?
phenomenal player. I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Etzebeth is
Well,
like
he's
head
up.
and
Like
shoulders above everyone.
I think if that's about like any other country, Snyman is doing 80 minutes every week. They're just so rich in that area that they can bring him on for 30, and he's so
Etzebeth
destructive.
free,
But
free.
sure, I
He,
appreciate,
I
like,
think
yeah,
he's
maybe I've gone over the top, but
so
he's
much
like he's
better
in
than
that
anyone else.
company.
So
Like he's not that
he
far
is
off Edsmith.
definitely.
Like Simon is phenomenal and will command a massive salary wherever he goes, and apparently that's what they're looking for. but I'd say the Sharks is his likely destination. There has been talk that John Klein might sign for Leon, but I would expect him to stay. And then what that frees up is, and especially with O'Mahony probably missing out this weekend with injury, that maybe affords them the luxury of moving Byrne to 6. Don't know why I said luxury there. That might force them to move Byrne to 6, start Klein, and maybe have Jean Klein and Edwin Adogbo in the second row, or a Hearn. And those two players, the emergence of those two players, I think, not that it's emergence because they were both good last season. Hearn's had injuries and it stunted his growth a little bit, but he's such an athletic player. Every time you see him, he just looks the part. And even when he came on in that Stormers game and he made an impact out of touch. You know, the Stormers game was a far more consequential game than Leinster's against Scarlets, but and they're in trouble at the scrum, but in the line out in the second row, they look very good. And I think Adogbo and Joe McCarthy, I think that's everyone's going to be talking about Crowley versus Byrne and Crowley versus Prendergast long term. But Adogbo versus McCarthy, Ireland has not produced a second row that's 120 kilo plus at 2021, and now we suddenly got two of them. Like, you know, and if I hope they go up against each other on Saturday, because they are proper prototype. They're the kind of players we sign from South Africa routinely because we don't grow them. And now suddenly there's two of them and they're 21, 22. So that's a really interesting area. For Munster, you got Jack Crowley starting at the Aviva. I interviewed him on Tuesday. The piece will go on Saturday. Super impressive guy. You know, he's, I think, next in line to be Ireland's 10, having been on the bench for the World Cup games, but he's up against Ross Byrne. That's another subplot that's out there. You know, going back to the Aviva where he dropped that goal back in May, now kind of owning that team because Ben Healy's moved on, Joey Carberry's injured. It's his to run, even though I tried to get him to say that, but he wouldn't. He's too humble to do it. But it's his team now, and he's like, he won't be a captain, but he's a senior figure at 23 in that group, and you know, to come back to play against a Leinster team who will be very bruised by that defeat, and to try and run the show at the Aviva, that's Andy Farrell and Mike Cat's replacement will be watching that closely. So there's loads to talk about with Munster. We spent about half an hour talking about Leinster, so Munster fans will be feeling aggrieved. But I think they're in a really interesting place as the champions, having made that run at the end of last season, but started this season probably a bit closer to their middling form of the middle of last year. So we don't know yet whether Munster are the real deal in terms of competing on two fronts towards the end of last season. And this is the day where they'll have to show it, because they've got Glasgow at home next Friday. Glasgow are going very well. Then they play Bayonne at home, Exeter away. Exeter aren't great, but they're into Europe then. So this is 4 weeks that really will see where Munster are at. And there's loads going on with them. I think Nankervell looks like a great signing. I think he looks like a really, really slick piece of business. The kind of really clever piece of business. He looks like, you hear he's a defensive leader already down there. But the scrum would worry you. And Jaeger, despite what Graham Roundtree said on the weekend, they're hardly going to pitch him in for his first game at the Aviva after just landing Wednesday, Thursday. So I think it's going to be a little while before they fix that. So loads to kind of digest at Munster and to find out about them this weekend.
Yeah, I think for Crowley, like, being able to kind of win that trophy so early in his career, really, I think can settle him in to that role. Like, similar to when Johnny Sexton came in for Leinster, won the Heineken Cup. I know he had been around, well, probably similar to Crowley at that stage, but it just meant that he was taking over from Contepomi. Crowley's kind of taking over as this being his team. Taking a bit of the pressure off, I think, is great. Like, because it means obviously they're still targeting trophies. Sorry,
because it's actually, there is more, because not even Johnny actually played quite a significant role in the 08 what was it, Magners League back then. The league, he actually played quite a big part in that league campaign. Will, so it's a great. I hadn't thought about the comparison, but yeah, like you know,
it means you can focus more on your role rather than having to like end a long drought or like, you know, win this big, you know, kind of take the monkey off the back. It just means that even though they're still targeting trophies, that it's very much a maybe just, you know, process focus or whatever you want to say, you know, the buzzwords about, or just like performance.
But you can kind of grow into it a bit, Will, can't you? You don't have this thing hanging on. You know the way, like, so Ross Byrne now has probably got this thing hanging over him. Prendergast might have it hanging over him, you know, and as the 10, you know, you seem to feel those things a little bit. They're a little bit heavier on the shoulders than it is for everyone else in the team. You know, there's just more responsibility rests with you. So, interesting to see how he goes. I think he's very exciting. I think he looks like he has a great head on his shoulders for the big games, as evidenced obviously by some of the performance at the end of last season, and the crucial kick against Leinster. But I just think I like everything about his game, actually. I think he doesn't seem to try. He's a guy that doesn't try and break you down every single phase. You know, he can play the simple option. He seems to be able to understand the game plan and implement it and bring a team around the pitch. He'll get better at that too, I think. Nice kicking game, and he's a good tackler. I have to say, it's such a big thing for your 10 to not have to worry about that. Is a big advantage for him. So, um, excited to watch him go. Excited to watch his progress. Hopefully, I mean, I think the key thing for him is probably going to be avoiding injuries. You look at Joey Carberry; he's just been poor guy. I mean, whatever about my thoughts on what position he should play, he has been. It's a career marred by injury, really, and should never have gone to that World Cup either. I mean, that was a poor personal decision, I think, to go and do that. He should have just been stronger and said no. It's hard with a World Cup, but sometimes you just got to have the bigger picture in mind. And he's never really recovered from that. So hopefully, we see him get back. But I just think it looks like Crowley. It's Crowley's team now. I would agree with Rhodes. I think it's a good point, and I think he seems like a guy who could take you forward and a guy you'd get behind. Actually, I think he's the kind of guy I would like. I used to play first centre a bit as well. And sometimes in there, when you're playing next to Raj, you kind of go, well, no, he's my quarterback. I'll take that ball across the line. I'll take that crash ball for him. Because I know that, or I'll get involved in that tackle, or you'll do extra things from you. Go the extra mile for your leader in the team, and he seems like he has that respect and has that aura about him. I think he looks like the responsibility rests pretty easy on the shoulders. Rhodes and Will, I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah, like, I mean, look, one of the things that it's an open secret in journalism is if someone gives you an interview, you're always positively disposed to them for a while afterwards, because but like sometimes you come away and you're nonplussed about them. But like Crowley's very impressive, and he's you can see why the coaches love it. The Ireland coaches love his presence and what he brings, and how when he comes into a team, whether when Sexton drops out, he comes in and he takes ownership right away. And I think with some of his rival tens, that hasn't always been the case. And I think Byrne does that as well. But I think one of the things Carberry maybe doesn't have is that commanding presence. He's not necessarily, and it's not necessarily just bollocking lads in the way that kind of Johnny was infamous for over the years. But it's that commanding presence that people follow. He's a leader that people follow, and he's an impressive talker, and he's tough. I bumped into a legendary Irish player in Munster on Monday who doesn't have a Munster background, and I asked him about the two of them, and him and Prendergast, and it was Crowley's toughness that he really admired the most. So and I asked Crowley about that in the interview, not to give the whole thing away, but he said when he was playing for Cork they wanted to put him out like they were like, we're going to hide you out in the wing, and he was like, these guys don't think I can tackle. And he took that personally, and he was like, I never want the team to think that about me again, and he wants to be in the
Michael
front
Jordan
line.
style.
Well, that's like,
Like,
he's got the mindset, and he sat down with me
Yeah.
on Tuesday at 3:45, and I was like, he was like, oh, this is the only time I'm really free all week. His day off, he's in doing homework and that sort of stuff. And look, like everyone's, I'm sure everyone's doing that sort of stuff, but he's diligent. He's just learned that he's been in a World Cup camp with Johnny Sexton every day for the last 8-10 weeks. He's been tapping into Sexton's knowledge. Even there was an interview with Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times recently where he said he got Sexton's number off of Mahoney when he was 20, and rang him and said, can you give me some advice and mentor me? And Sexton did. So that's like, even the fact that he's proactive enough to do that, to turn down O'Gara, there's a lot to like about him. And yeah, it's a big test for him, but he's also, like, you compare him to Sexton when he came through. He's 9 caps, been to a World Cup, and he's a year younger than Sexton was when he made his Ireland debut and made that breakthrough. So he's got time on the side as well. And obviously they're different characters, and he may not be as good as Johnny Sexton over a long time. Maybe nobody will, but he looks like he could carry that line from Humphreys to O'Gara to Sexton that Ireland have been able to rely on a 10. Now, he's going to have competition. I think Prendergast needs to get that defensive side right. Getting bowled over by one of the Scarlets, that didn't look good for him. But he's very young and has a bit of.
He looks skinny, doesn't he? He looks a
he's
bag
got
of bones. Yeah, he's a
yeah,
bit of growing to do. Yeah.
yeah. It looks like
Keith Ward wanted him to go to the World Cup. Do you remember that Off the Ball podcast?
he did.
And be at the World Cup.
In fairness, I didn't go along with it. I kind of I made a case for why it might happen, but he's not built. Sorry, he's built. He's got a frame that you can put weight onto, but it's gonna take a little while. I would imagine for the big games this season, it's gonna be Ross and Harry Byrne, where Harry's fit. I think Harry Byrne's looked quite good in the times I've seen him this season. His passing game is sensational, and he's a year older than Crowley, so if he gets fit, he's got a role to play in all this as well. So, it's the first time since, I guess, Sexton came on the scene and started challenging O'Gara that we've had a conversation about the number 10 jersey since Murrayfield, and that day where Paddy Jackson started and O'Gara came off the bench and had that kick, and that was the end of his international career. really it's been Sexton. There hasn't been a debate, whereas suddenly it's open season for that Irish jersey. And I think Crowley's at the top of the queue right now. Ross Byrne has a role to play. Harry has a role to play. And I think Prendergast, you're looking at next season before really he's going to be an Ireland contender. But they might bring him into camps just to take a look at him. You never know.
Leinster is such a weird one for me. Like, if you look at like we haven't even talked about Frawley. Like last summer, Frawley was like nearly a cert to be in behind Sexton. Do you know, after the tour, like, God,
Leinster just don't seem to see him there at all. You know,
I just find it absolutely bizarre that he hasn't just taken control of his own career.
Is it that they don't see him there, or that, like, because of the other outcasts they have, they're better off
He's
playing
been
him?
injured too. He's had some bad luck with injuries, guys. But I just think, like, if you look at, say, Ulster, look at Ulster at the moment, like, and they mightn't think they have a problem with Billy Burns, but they have a problem. And I know they've got some young talent coming through.
And Flannery looks decent.
Yeah, he had a few good bits against Connacht in the sports grounds that I saw, but I just think, like, what is Frawley now seems like a waste to have. Like, if you think about it, if you have those three guys, you've got Prendergast who's going to need some game time, you've got Harry Byrne who's been injury prone but needs game time, and you've got Frawley and Byrne. Like, that just, is that madness? Am I crazy?
And like Frawley from Leinster point of view had nailed down 12 as his kind of role, and Leinster seems just not. They don't pick him at 10 unless they really have to. He's moved to 15.
On a big game.
He's moved to 15, and Jamie Osborne's gone ahead of him. And I think if Henshaw's missing this weekend, they'll go with Osborne ahead of Frawley. I think. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but like, Osborne looks like a more natural 12 than Frawley did, even though Frawley's a really good player.
Animal to be in there, Rhodes. You've got to be an animal in there.
I think Frawley needs to bite that bullet. And I think you use the phrase "take control of your own career." Like, Jay Flannery's from Tipperary. He was behind Ben Healy and Jack Crowley, same era as the two of them. He was like, okay, I'm going to Ulster. Like, that's like, you know, that's an extra 2 hours on the road. You know, Frawley, like, Ulster is crying out for a 10. I'm sure Connacht have been in touch as well. I mean, they're well sorted now because they've got JJ Hanrahan, Dave Hawkshaw, and Jack Harty. But, you know, there were times where they were crying out for a 10. I'm sure he's got calls from all the coaches at different times.
Ulster are a big team.
Even Munster, like,
should just subsidise the thing.
It's up to the player. It's always up to the player. The player needs to grasp the nettle and go for it. You know, reading Andrew Conway talking about how he ended up at Munster. It has to be. They can't force anyone to go. And even Munster have Jack Crowley, Carberry's injured, and then it's Tony Butler. Like, they're light at 10. Like, he could go down there and get serious minutes as well if he wanted to. And I appreciate that players want to play for Leinster if they're from Dublin or from the province, but at some stage you got to be really selfish, and maybe you go to France for 4 years.
Ireland's got to be the target, Ruds.
Yeah,
it? As it always, I could never, like. It just annoys me. Like, I just feel like there's a guy now who's sitting there going, like, not getting enough minutes, like, in the gym. Like, he's just going to be in the gym. I don't know.
Yeah.
And he's a great player. He reminds me a lot. I thought what I see in Crowley, I saw a lot of in Frawley. I think they're quite similar players, actually. Even how they look, kind of pass and move on the pitch, I think they're quite similar. I don't know.
And like Luke, Will asked, you know, why is it that Leinster don't see him as a 10? They never pick him. That's kind of what I'm saying, is like, they'll always go with the other guy at 10 and move him. They don't move Sam Prendergast. They don't move Ross. I know Ross played a 12 once, but when the other guy's fit, it's always him that moves. If they saw him as the 10, they'd move other people. You know what I mean? Like, so they see him as a kind of a jack of all trades. And maybe
he's more versatile. He's quicker. I think he's more pace. I think he's more skilled.
Yeah.
In terms of playing 12 or 15 than the other people you've listed.
But he's older.
But he would be so good at 10 for Ulster. If you think about he would be brilliant for them. He would be so good for them, I think. He's a perfect fit for them. He looks like a tough guy to me. You know, he's an attacking threat himself. He's got a nice kicking game, a nice passing game. You think about that front line with Hume, McCluskey and him. Like, it'd be pretty hard to break them down for defensively, but they'd be an offensive threat as well.
He's 25 as well. You know, we're not talking about potential anymore. This is his window. This is like, he'll be 29 at the next World Cup. You know, he turned down a move to Australia. They came looking. He's born in Sydney, so he was Australian qualified. Eddie Jones came looking for him. He turned it down. He wants to play for Ireland. He has played for Ireland. I think he got a cap in those warm-ups. You know, he's obviously stubborn and willing to fight for his place, which is fair enough. But if he sees himself as Ireland's next 10 and he's getting picked behind Sam Prendergast now, behind Harry and Ross Byrne, he's got to be selfish and get out of there, I think.
He'd start for Australia. You've got
Ringrose is absolutely atrocious. Like, he would start for Australia, I'd say.
Well, look at Ben Healy. Like, Ben Healy's got out of Munster and suddenly he's gone straight into Edinburgh. You know, I know he played a bit at the World Cup, but like, he'll be Blair Kinghorn's going to Toulouse now, so he's
Well,
got a
he's got
clear
a
run at that.
chance if you're starting Rhodes. He's got a
Yeah,
chance. That's all you want in your career, is to have a chance to show. That's all. Like,
yeah.
all the hard work and all you do. Like, you don't. If you have 20 minutes a game, like you just don't know what shape the game is taking. Mostly after 20 minutes, Leinster are running in tries. You might feel great about that, but no one's giving you any credit for it, because we all think that. Well, we all know that for 90% of the season, we don't really care. We expect Leinster to put 40 points on you, against most of the teams. So no one gives you any credit for how you play in those last 20 minutes when the Leinster pack is beating the crap out of you. What they would give you big credit for is if you went up to Ulster and you took them into a final and got a URC final, or you got them out of into a semi-final of a Heineken Cup, or sorry, Investec Cup now. Sorry, all these kind of things. I don't know. I feel like I've always had to go with this Froley thing, because I think if he really looks coldly at that position, if he was never the only position in Leinster that was really up for grabs long term was 10. Like Henshaw has he's a decent enough age profile. He's going to be there for your crucial window of your career. Henshaw's probably going to be there. You're going to have Ringrose there. You're going to have Keenan at 15. Larmer probably going behind him, or Lowe. Like, you have to think coldly about this kind of thing and say, you've got to back yourself. But to a point, you've got to say, well, am I going to get enough opportunities? Like, whatever about backing yourself, that's fine. You've got to get opportunities in the shop window. It's what changes your career, and I think what Healy did is commendable. Obviously, he'd love him to be playing for Ireland, but I don't know. I just really think he needs to take the career by the scruff of the neck now. I think he needs, and Ulster would be crazy not to come in for him. Crazy. Or I know Munster, but Ulster is a real spot for me.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he fits this weekend. Like, if he's on the bench and at number 22, sure, because he does have that kind of benefit of, if you pick him at 22, reserved to Ross Byrne, he can come on at 10, 12, 15, probably even do a job on the wing for you if you want. So from Leinster's point of view, he's great to have, because he's a great squad member, and that gives him at least a sense that you're in the 23 for Munster, you're probably in the 23 for Europe, but if they don't go with him, if they go with Harry Byrne and say put Osborne in the 23 shirt, then he's got to be looking at going, hang on a second, I'm not even getting into the 23 for the Munster game. Like, I got to get out of here, because I'm better than this, and I'm better than what's playing. Like, I think he would start for Ulster, and he would be probably back up to Crowley in Munster as well. I think he's in a really good place in his career in terms of his ability, but he's not getting the opportunities. If he sees himself as a 10 and his coaches don't, but he's got to be looking elsewhere to get that opportunity.
Yeah, he would start for two other provinces. I think start for Connacht as well, and he'd start for Ulster, I think. And as you said, he'd be back up to Jack Crowley and we'll get better game time than he's getting now. Just before we finish up, I know we've gone a bit long, but I want to talk to you about the Sevens, Rudd. James Topping, the Sevens coach, gave an interview, I think, to Snake Hassan a few days ago, or it could be Monday, saying that he's open to 15 players coming in. He's having active conversations, trying to get 15 players coming in. What's your view on that? Like, in terms of whether they should be doing it, whether you think it's a good idea, like whether I don't know if you even care about it. Obviously, Antoine Dupont is the high-profile guy who's doing that in France. He's skipping his Six Nations and potentially parts of the run-in of the Toulouse season to chase this gold medal. Like, what's your view on it?
Well, if David Nucifora, wants to challenge Ireland, and he looks at his depth chart and goes, we have no reasonable backup to Hugo Keenan. Well, why doesn't he go to Hugo Keenan and go, you're in the Sevens program now for the year? And then that means Andy Farrell has to find an alternative 15. If you're being really kind of like, if you're looking at it the way South Africa have done things and really just disrupted things and gone, right, you're not playing, you've got 1-15. And like, I'm not making this argument. I'm just kind of almost
I hope
God, I'm honest with you, my blood was boiling already. I was like, oh,
like,
my
theoretically,
God.
like, we got to challenge how we. But I think Irish rugby has to challenge how we look at things. And there is a thing that Nucifora pointed out last year, and I think we're seeing it with all the young players coming through, is that there are not enough opportunities for players to play in Ireland at the moment, and they're looking at either whether, like, they're going to play academies select against the Italian Academy select in the middle of the AIL season, which is a bit of a thumb in your nose to the AIL. There was the Emerging Ireland thing last year. I asked Nucifora last year whether we needed a fifth province, and he didn't dismiss it, but he was like, financially it would have to work, and there was talk about buying London Irish, and I think that was explored, but there's got to be ways of getting people in, and at the moment you have log jams in certain positions. So say if you were looking at it, if you were, say, David Humphreys coming in and you come in cold and you're looking at the big picture, you go, right, we have one guy at 15 who's the best player possibly in the world in this position, but we've no alternatives. I'm going to challenge Andy Farrell by sending him off to Paris and try and win a gold medal. I know it's not going to happen. I think, but that's one of the I think James Topping can say that all he likes, but I don't think any of the Ireland 15 players, certainly the top right ring, are going to go off and play sevens to try and win an Olympic medal. I can understand why it's happened with Dupont, because it's in Paris and because it's a real prestige for the French state to win as many goals as possible, and he is the star, and it sells that whole competition. There's loads of play, like I'm sure Macron was nearly involved in that decision. That's the levels it would probably go to. Whereas it's not the same for Ireland. It'd be deeply unfair on the sevens players who got them there as well, and it doesn't always work. New Zealand brought Sonny Bill and I think Artie Sevilla 4 years ago. They didn't get a gold medal. So it's not a guarantee of success. So, um, the sevens program operates pretty successfully as it is, and the players who've dedicated themselves to it are very good at sevens. That they may not transfer across as much. So I think it's highly unlikely that anyone from the 15s program will go. They named their squads last week for the first couple of windows. If you want to be going to Paris, you want to be playing in Dubai and Cape Town next month. At this stage, so I don't think it's going to happen. But I think we should be open to discussions about anything in terms of challenging the Irish system and trying to like Hugo Keenan's incredible levels of fitness and skill set. It's in part down to the coaching you got at Blackrock as a kid. In part down to the fact he played.
Everything is so overrated. And so you'd swear that like he played sevens for 5 years and like everything he learned came from sevens. The way people throw it around, I just don't.
When he did. Oh yeah, we were talking about it on the weekend. He's ruled it out anyway, so this is all hypothetical. But he does say that he was there for he did 2 years in the circuit, so he did play a lot with them. And I do think it develops your fitness and your skill set and your ability to cover space. And probably as a back, it puts you in a lot more rucks than you would have been in as a 15s player. So like you kind of have those one-on-one rucks, it brings up your strength. There are skills you can develop there. But to go back to the original question, like, is Garry Ringrose going to go to Paris to play in the sevens? No, like Leinster won't let it happen. And for all the Nucifora backs a sevens program, he knows that 15s in men's 15s is the golden goose, and the Six Nations is the overarching priority for everyone at this stage, and beyond that, the World Cup.
But Ireland's system is unbelievably good. Like we have been unbelievably successful, bar the World Cups, the last 10 or 15 years. Really, we've been really good. Like you think about all the grants, like a period of kind of unprecedented success in Six Nations. It hasn't transpired at World Cup. That's yet to. And by the way, we still could. That this year should have been the one we got over. Like if you think about that maul, I'm still thinking about that maul. But like I don't know, like I think it'd be crazy for someone like Keenan to go. Like he was the best player on the pitch on the weekend by like I think he was. I'm not gonna say head and shoulders, but he was definitely head above everyone else on the pitch on the weekend. He was magic. Everything he touches, passing. Like I would say, there's definitely something in that from the sevens. Anytime his passing was so crisp, like he was so dangerous. Footwork, he's really his lateral movement. I didn't think he had that. That's something he's definitely developed the last couple of years. Always had that high end kind of change of pace, but he was magic. They couldn't touch him on the weekend, and his tackling was brilliant too. So they are things he definitely developed from sevens, and I think he has taken some of those things. And I'd say it probably improved him as an athlete. But I do think, like at this stage of your career, like he's got a crucial juncture, and all the money's in 15s. I suppose I've never really seen it as that important, the sevens. I just haven't probably, and I think the best teams will always be specialist. I think you look like the Fijian guys are unbelievable. There's some of the South African guys. I feel like, you can't deal with some of the natural athletes that some of these guys produce. Just, they're just genetically superior. You realize that when you come up against some of these guys, just the pace and the power. But, I think Ireland will always struggle a little bit. But yeah, look, it is an interesting thing. I think the DuPont one, I'm amazed at. I think there has to be massive money behind that, and it's definitely because obviously there's been some political pressure put on somewhere that they need to try and find a gold medal somewhere, and they think he might be the guy.
It's ridiculous that he's going. Like
it's absolutely insane at the height of his powers. Like I'm
the
amazed.
captain of the team is leaving. I think
it's a shocking decision
on a quasi junket.
It's not a junket. It's the Olympics. Like it's an Olympic. Like he will, if he wins gold, and that's what he's thinking. He's going to win gold. He will be an Olympic gold medalist. Like he'll have that for the rest of his life. And that is.
Fiji will smoke them, and so you know what I mean.
Well, maybe so, but even if he gets a silver or bronze, he'll have gone to Olympics. Like it's a short career, and he's going. You know what? Like I can go and do this in Paris and look, I think he's under pressure to do it as well.
The counter argument is that it is a short career. That's my
sure, but
just throwing away a season is like insane to me.
but it's a post World Cup season as well. It may elongate his career because he's not playing week to week in the top 14 every time. So it's almost a sabbatical. It's a kind of a window to get really fit,
I think
really
that's never.
fast.
I've never seen anyone that's really worked well for. Honestly, I think everyone has come back slightly disimproved. I can't think of anyone who's come back better from a sabbatical. And I would challenge you to find a player who has. They always go over brilliant, earn a load of cash, and come back just slightly worse.
I think the South Africans. I think the South Africans use their time in Japan well. They go off and kind of rest up and look at Quagga Smith. Like Quagga Smith is like if I was maybe if we flip it and go right, maybe don't take one of the senior internationals, but take, I don't know, someone like Alex Candelan or one of like Ruan Quinn, who's really highly rated down in Munster, but he's probably not going to make a big impact this season. You know, you look at what Quagga Smith has achieved on the back of a serious amount of time with the Sevens, and then he comes into a World Cup and he is one of the game changers off the bench for South Africa, and I think would command a massive salary in Europe if he wanted it. He's just hiding away in Japan playing soft rugby, as a professional coach called it the other day, and then he dedicates pretty much all of his intense rugby to playing for the Springboks. You know, there's you know, is there an argument for getting a younger guy in there, you know, and give him that experience as well? But at the same time, the players who've got them there deserve the shot at Paris as well. You know, Harry McNulty, the guys who've been there the whole time. There are good players in there who are seven specialists, but I think you should ask the question. I've no problem that challenge being made, and I think we need to look at everything in terms of disrupting what we do normally to try and get that extra level, and maybe it's taking a player out like Dupont. That forces France to find a new scrum half for the Six Nations.
Like,
and they have to go.
World champs at the World Cup, like we beat them, and like we lost to New Zealand by like it was
But you still can get better. You can always get better, and like by this and
that's the way. I think I don't know if that's the way. Like like I thought we got smoked in the tight exchanges. Like I'm not sure going this like having more sevens guys is what we need. I think we need more of your original point about Leinster, like a specialist scrummager, or we need someone who's destructive physically. You know. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, I get the point. It's all we should definitely be thinking about ways to always improve.
It's more about the depth thing. It's like, if Hugo Keenan's just so reliable, so fit, he plays all the time. You never know who the backup is until it's too late. And obviously he didn't. Like there was one of the big questions going over. Look, I'm not advocating for this to happen. I'm just wondering, if Razzie was in charge, what would he do? Like that's how I'm thinking these days. Like what would Razzie do?
I don't want. They nearly lost that brilliant team, the World Cup. I'm with their selection. I'm convinced of it. I'm not. Anyway, we can't start. We're going on too long as it is.
I think we're already touching on possibly our longest ever podcast. But I just wanted to get that sevens question at the end because I thought you'd have interesting things to say, and you guys didn't disappoint. To be fair, but we're going to leave it there for this week's show. I'd like to thank Rud and Luke for joining me on this week's episode. We'll be back tomorrow with a team news podcast after Leinster and Munster named their sides. Until then, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.